The bees come. When the flower blooms, the bees come uninvited. Sri Ramakrishna. We came to Maharajji's feet, impelled by our yearning for the living spirit and drawn by his light. We came from Europe and Great Britain, the United States and Canada, Australia and South America. As Hermann Hesse said of the fellow travelers in his journey to the East, each had his or her own special reason for making the journey, but all also shared a common goal. We came with our varying hues of cynicism and faith, open or closed-heartedness, sensuality or asceticism, intellectual arrogance or humility. To each, Maharajji responded uniquely, now fiercely, now tenderly, now through ignoring us or sending us away, now through making much over us, now through reading the mind and heart, now through playing dumb. He did what was necessary to quiet the mind and open the heart so that the thirst that had drawn us all to him could be slaked. I was travelling with a young Western fellow in India. We had come to the mountains in a Land Rover I had borrowed from a friend in order to find this fellow's guru, to get some help with his visa problem. I was in a bad mood, having smoked too much hashish, been in India too long, and not particularly wanting to visit a guru anyway. We stopped at this temple and he asked where the guru was. The Indians who had gathered around the car pointed to a nearby hill. In a moment he was out of the car and running up the hill. They were following him and appeared delighted to be able to see the guru. I got out of the car. Now I was additionally upset because everybody was ignoring me. I ran after them, barefoot, up this rocky path, stumbling all the way. I didn't want to see the guru anyway, and what the hell was this all about? Around a bend of the path, I came to a field overlooking a valley, and in the field, under a tree, sat a man in his 60s or 70s with a blanket around him. Surrounding him were 8 or 9 Indians. I was aware of the beautiful tableau, the group, the clouds, the green valley, the visual purity of the foothills of the Himalayas. My travelling companion ran to this man and threw himself on the ground, doing Danda Pranam. He was crying, and the man was patting him on the head. I was more and more confused. I stood to the side thinking, I am not going to touch his feet. I don't have to. I am not required to do that. Every now and then this man looked up at me and twinkled a little. His glances just made me more uncomfortable. Then he looked at me and started speaking in Hindi, of which I understood very little. Another man, however, was translating. I heard him ask my friend, "You have a picture of Maharajji?" My friend nodded, "Yes." "Give it to him," said the man in the blanket, pointing at me. That's very nice, I thought, giving me a picture of himself, and I smiled and nodded appreciatively. But I was still not going to touch his feet. Then he said, "You came in a big car?" Yes. I hadn't wanted to borrow the car in the first place, not wanting the responsibility, so the car was a source of irritation for me. He looked at me, smiling, and said, "You will give it to me?" I started to say, "What?" But my friend looked up from the ground where he was still lying and said, "Maharajji, if you want it, you can have it. It's yours." And I said, "No, wait a minute. You can't give away David's car like that." The old man was laughing. In fact, everyone was laughing except me. Then he said, "You made much money in America?" I reviewed all my years as a professor and smuggler and very proudly said, "Yes." "How much did you make?" Well, I said, at one time, and I sort of upped the figure a bit further to inflate my ego, $25,000. The group converted that into rupees, and everybody was awed by this figure. All of this was, of course, bragging on my part. I had never made $25,000. And he laughed again and said, "You'll buy a car like that for me?" I remember what went through my mind at that moment. Although I had come from a family of Jewish fundraisers, I had never seen such hustling as this. He doesn't even know my name, and already he wants a $7,000 vehicle, I thought. Well, maybe, I said. The whole thing was by now upsetting me very much. And he said, "Take them away and give them food." And so we were given magnificent food, and then we were told to rest. Some time later we were back with Maharajji, and he said to me, "Come here, sit." So I sat down facing him, and he looked at me and said, "You were out under the stars last night." "Uh-huh." "You were thinking about your mother." "Yes." The previous night, a few hundred miles away, I had gone outside during the night to go to the bathroom. The stars had been very bright, and I had remained outside, feeling very close to the cosmos. At that time I had suddenly experienced the presence of my mother, who had died 9 months previously of a spleen condition. It was a very powerful moment, and I had told no one about it. "She died last year." "Mm-hmm." "She got very big in the stomach before she died." "Yes." He leaned back and closed his eyes and said in English, "Spleen. She died of spleen." What happened to me at that moment I can't really put into words. He looked at me in a certain way, and two things happened. They do not seem like cause and effect, but rather appeared to be simultaneous. My mind began to race faster and faster to try to get leverage, to get a hold on what he had just done. I went through every super CIA paranoia I'd ever had. Who is he? Who does he represent? Where's the button he pushes to make the file appear? Why have they brought me here? None of it would gel. It was just too impossible that this could have happened this way. My traveling companion didn't know about any of the things Maharajji was saying, and I was a tourist in a car. The whole thing was just inexplicable. My mind went faster and faster. Until then, I had had two models for psychic experiences. One was, well, it happened to somebody else, and it's very interesting, and we certainly must keep an open mind about these things. That was my social science approach. The other one was, well, I'm high on LSD. Who knows how it really is? After all, I had had experiences under the influence of chemicals in which I had created whole environments. But neither of these categories applied to this situation, and as my mind went faster, I felt like a computer that has been fed an insoluble problem. The bell rings, and the red light goes on, and the machine stops. My mind just gave up. It burned out its circuitry, its zeal to have an explanation. I needed something to get closure at the rational level, and there wasn't anything. At the same moment, I felt this extremely violent pain in my chest, and a tremendous wrenching feeling, and I started to cry. I cried and cried and cried, but I was neither happy nor sad. It was a kind of crying I had not experienced before. The only thing I could say about it was it felt as if I had finished something. The journey was over. I had come home. In the words of Dada, We all think we are chasing the Guru, but really, you see, he is chasing us. All I knew about the hardships of India made me sure I didn't want to go there. Yet, in October of 1971, I found myself at JFK Airport with two friends waiting to board a plane for Bombay. A large crowd of our New York spiritual group had come to see us off, or as I suspected, to make sure we actually got on the plane. We were all three in varying states of panic, wondering what we were doing. Both the panic and the confusion were to intensify 100-fold when we actually arrived in India. We three, like nearly all the group of Westerners we eventually joined around Maharajji, first heard of him through Ramdas. Yet, though my life totally changed after the night I first heard Ramdas lecture, I did not feel drawn to go to India. Partially, the mystic of what going to India represented in those days made it seem presumptuous for me to even consider the trip. Nor was it clear to me that the power of awakening I had experienced was in fact a connection with Maharajji, that he could possibly be my Guru. We had all heard how difficult it was to find him. And what if he sent me away as he had others? Now, 3 years later, I was going to India, by, but still I hadn't the temerity to chance rejection. I was going to see some South Indian saints and perhaps later visit up north if there seemed any hope of being received. Coming off the plane in Bombay, we were met by an airline representative who advised us that we had reservations on an afternoon flight to New Delhi and that tickets were waiting for us at the counter. This was a stunner, but after a 26 or 28-hour flight, we were too dazed to feel more than mild wonder. After all, we were in India. Anything could happen here. In Delhi, we thought of going to the American Express office to ask for messages, as we had planned to do in Bombay. After all, since we were here, there must be a message. There was. Go to Jaipuriya Bhavan in Vrindavan. Maharajji expected soon. It was signed Balaram Das. We didn't know who that was. We learned that Vrindavan was not far from Delhi and that we could get there by an afternoon train. Somehow, we never thought of pausing in the relative westernness of Delhi. The message said go, and go we did. We thereby learned the first great lesson of India. Never travel by third-class unreserved coach. It was the equivalent of a 3-hour ride on a New York City subway at rush hour with the addition of sunshine, dust, and engine smoke pouring in open windows. Eventually, we battled our way off the train at Mathura, and in the glowing dusk of the Indian plain, whose beauty we could not then appreciate, we found a bus to take us to nearby Vrindavan. There we were put down in the large bazaar of what to all appearances was a 13th century village of winding alleys full of people, rickshaws, dogs, pigs, and cows. By now it was dark, and most of the illumination came from lanterns in the shop lining the streets. We asked for directions to Jaipuriya Bhavan in our non-existent Hindi, and were directed first up one alley and then down another. It grew later, and the shops were beginning to close. A panic grew with our exhaustion and hunger, for even if we came upon the hostel, we would not recognize it, for every sign was in Hindi. We began to envision ourselves huddling for the night among the cows in some doorway. Then suddenly approaching us appeared a Westerner, someone whom I'd met the year before in California. In hysterical relief, I threw my arms around him, but he an old timer in India, was totally calm in the face of our emotion. Oh, yes, Jaipuriya Bhavan was just there, around the next bend. During the next few days, the small Western satsang began gathering at Jaipuriya Bhavan, awaiting Maharajji's arrival at his Vrindavan ashram. Many of them we knew from America, including the mysterious Balaram Das, whom we'd known as Peter. We heard their stories of Maharajji with relief and anticipation. He didn't sound so fierce and terrifying after all. Then word came that he was here. The next morning we could go to have his darshan. I arrived at the ashram a little late with Radha, nervously clutching my borrowed sari and the offering of flowers and fruit. We circumambulated the temple and pranamed to Hanumanji, then approached the gate in the wall between the temple garden and the ashram. How well I remember that green wooden door. When we knocked, the old chowkidar opened it a crack and peered out at us. Then, as each time afterward for as long as I was in India, I wondered if he would let us in. But he stepped back, pulling the door open for us. I looked through, down the vista of the long veranda along the front of the ashram building. At the far end, Maharajji was sitting alone on his wooden bed. When I saw his great form, my heart jumped so that I staggered against the gate. That first sight of him is still piercingly clear in my memory. Radha had already rushed through, and I ran after her, losing my sandals along the way. It was all so simple and familiar. Bowing at his feet, giving the fruit and flowers, which he immediately threw back in my lap, weeping and laughing. Maharajji was bouncing, smiling, and crowing in English, "Mother from America! Mother from America!" During that first darshan, though Maharajji spoke mainly in Hindi, I understood everything without the interpreter who stood nearby. And I recognized the love that had poured through Ramdas, that had irresistibly drawn me to India. Here was the source.